Buckingham Palace has stunned the nation with a late-night statement reportedly stripping Camilla of her Queen Consort status, reducing her to Princess Consort, a move that has left her visibly shaken and the palace in turmoil. Sources whisper of a catastrophic breach tied to the missing Welsh gold ring, tangled loyalties, and a private council's shocking verdict. With whispers of betrayal echoing through royal halls, what really unfolded behind closed doors? Stay with us as we unpack the claims, facts, and fallout. Balmoral Castle sealed. King Charles rattled. A monarchy in crisis. The first sign that something was gravely amiss didn't come from the ceremonial halls of Buckingham Palace, but from the mist-wrapped Scottish Highlands. Balmoral Castle, forever tied to Queen Elizabeth II's memory, suddenly shut its gates without warning. The announcement was terse, almost chilling in its brevity. Closed to the public, effective immediately due to a security concern. No further explanation. Tourists, who had traveled from across the globe to walk the same grounds where the late Queen spent her last summers, were turned away. Local guides whispered nervously.
I think it's wonderful work, and I do thank everybody and all the others too who have been volunteering.
Residents of nearby Ballater, used to the seasonal bustle, exchanged wary glances. This was not a routine closure for repairs or a discreet royal gathering. It was the height of the tourist season. Money had been spent, tickets booked, and yet the castle stood locked, silent, and forbidding. Naturally, speculation ignited like wildfire. If Balmoral, the royal family's most private sanctuary, was unsafe, what could that mean? Former Scotland Yard officers muttered darkly on television about an internal breach, hinting at betrayal from within. For many, it seemed unthinkable. But then again, how else could an estate so well guarded suddenly fall under such mysterious circumstances? And while Scotland's hills buzzed with unanswered questions, back in London, King Charles III was wrestling with anxieties of his own. At 75, the king had already endured much public scrutiny over his marriage to Camilla, the haunting shadow of Diana's legacy, and more recently, a difficult recovery from prostate cancer. Those who saw him in recent months noticed the lines etched deeper across his face, his expression heavy with the kind of weariness that only comes from carrying centuries of tradition on one's shoulders. Within the private confines of his Buckingham Palace study, lined with ancient tapestries and infused with the scent of polished oak, Charles performed a personal ritual few knew about. Hidden away beneath the paneling of that very room was a custom safe. Inside it lay the Welsh gold ring, inlaid with a striking green emerald. To the public, it was merely a jewel, but to the king, it was something far greater, a tangible link to his lineage, passed from George VI through Queen Elizabeth II, and finally, to him. It wasn't worn for state occasions, nor paraded for the cameras. Instead, in his quietest hours, Charles would slide it onto his finger, feel the cool weight, and remind himself of his vow to the crown. It was in many ways his private crown. But the morning after Balmoral's abrupt closure, the ritual was broken. When Charles reached for the velvet box, his fingers touched only emptiness. At first, he thought it must be a trick of the mind, exhaustion clouding his memory. He searched again, methodical, desperate. The box was gone. The safe was bare. The words caught in his throat, dry and sharp. Impossible! The king's composure, usually guarded even in the most trying times, cracked. Sweat prickled his forehead, and his heart thudded with an urgency that betrayed his calm exterior. Within minutes, palace security was summoned. Discreet but ruthless, they swept through Buckingham's gilded halls, from marble staterooms to forgotten servants' corridors. Staff were quietly questioned. Doors long locked were inspected, and yet nothing surfaced. The heirloom had vanished without a trace. Behind closed doors, the king's fury erupted. Witnesses say his fist struck the mahogany desk so hard that the sound echoed through the chamber. His words were unmistakably urgent. "Find it, at any cost. This is not a jewel. It is my legacy, my mother's inheritance."
Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing.
Though palace officials tried to contain the matter, whispers began to slip beyond the gates. Could the Balmoral closure and the missing ring be connected? Was it mere coincidence that the very symbol of Charles's promise to the throne disappeared just as his late mother's sanctuary was sealed off from the world? Or was this something far more sinister? A breach not of walls, but of trust within the royal household itself? Of course, in the absence of facts, rumors rushed in. Some speculated that the ring's disappearance might expose deeper fractures within the royal family. Others suggested that Balmoral's sudden closure had less to do with a security scare and more with containing a scandal too explosive for the public to bear. After all, history has shown time and again that when it comes to royalty, what we don't see is often more telling than what we do. As the sun set over Balmoral's locked gates and London's press rooms clamored for answers, one truth remained inescapable. Something had disturbed the fragile balance of crown and country. A castle closed, a relic missing, and a king left rattled at the very heart of his reign. And while officials insist calm, one can't help but ask, was this merely an unfortunate coincidence, or the beginning of a shadowy chapter in the monarchy's story? But what secret actions is Camilla taking inside the palace? And how could they change everything? Stay connected to your screen. Camilla's silent moves inside the palace, the unperturbed monarch, and the path of subtle indications. Those were the whispers echoing through Buckingham Palace during one of its most turbulent weeks. Behind gilded walls and whispered counsel, Queen Camilla appeared untouched by the storm.
And like each one of you here, she loved to write. For a decade, she wrote poems.
Dressed in pale blue and dazzling cameras with her usual charm, she moved through a London charity event as though nothing unusual lingered in the air. Her laughter was light, her handshake firm, her poise unbroken. Yet, seasoned royal watchers knew better. They studied her gaze, sharp, calculating, as if every smile hid a move in a game of chess only she knew how to play. It was at this very outing that the first spark of suspicion emerged. Camilla wore a bracelet never before seen in her public collection. Its central stone, a gleaming emerald, bore a striking resemblance to the gem that once adorned the fabled Welsh gold ring, an heirloom bound tightly to the monarchy's history. Could it be a coincidence? Perhaps. But for those who had followed the mystery of the ring's disappearance, the bracelet raised eyebrows that could no longer be lowered. Meanwhile, inside the palace, unease grew. A devoted servant of more than 3 decades, Mr. James, brought disturbing news directly to King Charles. He had found fresh scratches on the lock of the king's private study, marks that suggested not a clumsy key, but the skilled hand of someone with professional tools. Charles, pale with shock, demanded security footage, yet the answer only deepened the riddle. The palace's state-of-the-art cameras had mysteriously failed for 2 hours, precisely the night the ring vanished. Not once in over a year had the system suffered such a blackout. Coincidence? Or something far more deliberate? As if that weren't unsettling enough, one of Camilla's trusted aides, a woman with free access to Charles's private quarters, left the palace suddenly after that night. She departed in the early hours, carrying a tightly sealed case. Whispers grew louder. The broken lock, the missing footage, the vanished aide, and now the emerald bracelet. The elements seemed too perfectly aligned to ignore. Charles, torn between anger and disbelief, began to replay recent conversations in his mind. Hadn't Camilla questioned the palace's outdated security measures just weeks earlier? And had she not brushed off his attachment to the ring as charming but old-fashioned? What once seemed like idle remarks now felt like pieces of a larger puzzle. Then came another blow, one not of jewels, but of titles. Charles, scrolling through the royal family's official website, noticed something shocking. Camilla's biography had been altered. No longer was she listed as Queen Consort, the title carefully chosen by the late Queen Elizabeth II herself to honor tradition and public sentiment. Instead, she was boldly styled as Queen. The change had not been cleared through any official process. It was, to Charles, both a betrayal of his mother's last wishes Edward, a loyal advisor who had long stood beside Charles, offered a warning in private. "Your Majesty." He said gravely, "This is not overstepping. This is power building. The ring, the title, the whispers with media strategists, it is all connected. If you do not act, the throne itself could be compromised from within." Days later, Edward was abruptly reassigned to a ceremonial post in Scotland, near Balmoral, of all places. To many, the move reeked of quiet exile. When Charles confronted Camilla over dinner, the air was thick with tension. Candlelight flickered against gilt walls as he asked, voice low but seething, "Where is the ring? And why was Edward removed without my consent?" Camilla's reply was calm, her smile gentle, though her eyes betrayed no softness. "My dear, do you really question me?" Edward was sowing needless discord. "As for the title, it was a simple correction, reflecting my true role. Every choice I make is for the monarchy's survival. We cannot cling to the past if we wish to endure." And with that, she steered the conversation to charity projects and youth engagement, carefully sidestepping the question of the ring. Her deflection only deepened the shadows gathering in Charles's mind. Was this merely a series of unfortunate coincidences? Or had the Queen herself become the architect of a palace intrigue that threatened the very foundation of trust within the monarchy? The answers remain hidden behind locked doors and practiced smiles. But one thing is certain: the king, once confident in his closest ally, now finds himself wondering whether he is truly alone at the heart of his own court. But what sparked Queen Camilla's bold words and the king's silent anguish? Stay glued to your screen to uncover the drama. Queen Camilla's bold words and the king's silent anguish. The interview, the shard, and a monarch's despair, three elements that collided in a single stormy week and left Buckingham Palace reeling. It all unfolded on July 25, 2025, when Queen Camilla, without warning, appeared live on ITV in what many described as the most shocking broadcast of the decade. No prior palace announcement, no authorization from the royal press office, just Camilla, seated in a brightly lit studio, speaking directly to the nation with a calm voice and a steady gaze. She spoke not about tradition, but about change. "We must not be bound by outdated symbols," she said, her tone smooth, almost persuasive. "Crowns, rings, jewels, these are relics of the past. The monarchy should be measured by service, by connection with people, not by treasures locked in glass cases." To casual viewers, it may have sounded like progress. To King Charles, who sat alone in his study at the palace, the words struck like a blade. The loss of the Welsh gold ring, once belonging to his mother, had already weighed heavily on him. Now here was his queen, dismissing the very objects he held sacred as if they were trinkets. News outlets pounced. "Camilla rejects royal legacy. Crisis for Charles," blared CNN. The BBC gathered analysts to debate. Was she cleverly downplaying the missing ring before the press uncovered its theft? Or was this a genuine attempt to redefine the crown's meaning for a modern Britain? Either way, the narrative slipped beyond the king's control. And then, Camilla vanished. No calls answered, no sightings that night. For Charles, the silence was unbearable. Unable to rest, he left the palace's suffocating corridors and wandered into the gardens. The late summer air was sharp, leaves rustling under the moonlight. In that solitude, he looked less like a monarch and more like a weary figure haunted by his own reign. It was near a seldom-used gate that a guard noticed something glittering faintly in the grass. A fragment, small but unmistakable, emerald green, catching the moonlight. The officer delivered it at once to the king. When Charles held it in his trembling hand, his chest tightened. The color, the cut, it matched the jewel from the missing ring perfectly. But another image surfaced in his mind. Camilla's bracelet, worn conspicuously only a week before, set with new stones that drew whispers even then. Could she have attempted to repurpose the royal emerald into her personal adornment? Or was the fragment proof of a careless accident, a secret gone wrong? The questions multiplied. each one cutting deeper, Charles retreated to the bronze statue of his mother in the gardens. Clutching the shard, he sank to his knees, the cold metal of the effigy contrasting with the heat of his anguish. "I failed you, Mother," he whispered, voice cracking. "I ignored the warnings. She has taken what was ours." That night, London's mist crept across the palace grounds as the king remained sleepless, gazing from his window. He was not the image of majesty, but of a man cornered, betrayed by silence, by a jewel, and perhaps by love itself. And though no confrontation came that night, one seemed inevitable. Would the queen explain, deny, or defy? The nation waited. Gossip swirled, and the mystery of the emerald fragment only grew darker. But what secret moves is Camilla making behind the scenes, and how could they reshape everything? Stay with us. Camilla's silent strategy. The power of being seen. Camilla never had to demand titles, rewrite rules, or storm into tradition with sweeping changes. Instead, she leaned on something far more subtle and, in many ways, more powerful: image. Over time, carefully and quietly, she began to shift how her family was seen, not with declarations, but with appearances that seemed almost accidental. Insiders whisper that the strategy was deliberate. Place her children where eyes couldn't help but notice, not in the spotlight, but always in the frame. Her son, Tom Parker Bowles, once a figure in the background, started to appear at dinners alongside government ministers. Her daughter, Laura, quietly turned up at cultural and art functions tied to royal causes. No headlines, no speeches, no fanfare, just presence. But in the royal world, presence is everything. To be in the picture is to matter. To matter is to become part of tradition. It is how legacies are shaped without a single word spoken. What unsettled King Charles was never the behavior of Camilla's children. It was the implication. Familiarity, after all, breeds acceptance, and acceptance in the monarchy can, over time, harden into tradition. Once the public begins to see a face in royal settings often enough, the question of whether they belong shifts. Belonging becomes assumed. A moment that insiders describe as particularly telling came when a seating chart for a major palace function surfaced. Tom Parker Bowles, it turned out, was placed next to the Archbishop of Canterbury. Was it coincidence? One senior aide insisted it was anything but. It wasn't a mistake, they confided. It was a message that Camilla, through quiet moves, was positioning her family not as visitors but as fixtures. For Charles, the implications cut deep. This was the same woman he had fought decades to bring into the palace, weathering storms of public opinion and family resistance. Yet now, it seemed Camilla was working on a different battlefield, one of perception, not politics. Slowly, gently, she was building a legacy for her children, not through law, but through visibility. Royal historians call this soft power. It does not demand. It suggests. It does not fight. It normalizes. And once something is normalized, it is nearly impossible to undo. Charles' allies reportedly worry that this quiet strategy could blur the boundaries of bloodline versus step-family, reshaping the Windsor narrative in ways no decree ever could. Was this Camilla's long game all along? Or is it simply a mother ensuring her children are not forgotten in the gilded shadows of history? Whatever the truth, one thing is certain. In the monarchy, being seen is the first step to being remembered. But what really happened with the fractured ring and Buckingham's sudden silence? Stay connected to uncover the shocking truth. The fractured ring and the frozen silence of Buckingham. The mirror chamber and the frigid admission. Those words alone could define the morning of August 2024, a day that will forever linger in whispers around Buckingham Palace. When Camilla stepped inside the palace that morning, her arrival was like a storm behind closed doors. Draped in deep blue silk, hair perfectly arranged, she carried herself with the dignity of a queen. Though something was missing. The emerald bracelet that had long glistened on her wrist was absent, sparking questions before she even spoke. Inside the mirror room, an opulent chamber lined with gilded reflections from King George II's reign, Charles waited. He had been awake since before dawn, pacing in silence, shadows under his eyes betraying a sleepless night.
As Canada moves forward with nation-building projects,
The mirrors multiplied his weary figure endlessly, surrounding him with versions of himself that looked more haunted than regal. In his hand, he clutched a fractured emerald shard, trembling with fury and despair. As the heavy doors shut behind Camilla, Charles turned, his voice cracking with rage. The emerald fragment in his palm became an accusation, a symbol of betrayal. He demanded answers about the ring, the missing jewel, and the legacy he believed she had dared to claim for herself. He spoke not as a king, but as a wounded man, echoing warnings he said he had once ignored. His accusations weren't just about a piece of jewelry. They carried the weight of history, family, and trust. Camilla stood motionless, her calm unnerving.
He went through different phases as a child by loving this or that. But I think
With deliberate grace, she drew a ring from her bag, the Welsh gold circlet once thought untouchable. She placed it between them on an antique table. Its emerald centerpiece bore a crack, the same wound that mirrored their broken bond. Her voice was steady, void of apology. She spoke of years living under Diana's ghost, Elizabeth's shadow, and a nation's relentless judgment. Taking the ring, she claimed, was not theft. It was a declaration. She would no longer be remembered as a consort in footnotes, but as an equal in her own right. Charles's tears betrayed him, slipping down his face as he touched the scarred stone. The damage was beyond repair, not only in the jewel, but in their union. And when Camilla's footsteps echoed away, her final words lingered. Rings may be mended, but fractures in hearts and kingdoms rarely heal. So what remains? A monarch undone by mirrors, or a queen determined to leave her mark? That perhaps is the question history will decide. But what really happened on the night Camilla's fate was sealed? And how did it change everything? Keep watching. The night Camilla's fate was sealed. The repercussions of that fateful encounter in the mirror room spread like wildfire. Headlines erupted, social media stormed, and hashtags like Art Justice for Diana trended for days, reigniting a national conversation long buried in the shadows of the 1990s. Public opinion turned sharply against Camilla, with surveys suggesting a majority now viewed her as untrustworthy and a potential threat to the monarchy's stability. But behind the glittering facades of royal protocol, decisions were being made in total secrecy, far from prying eyes. Balmoral Castle, long a symbol of royal tradition and quiet authority,
And like each one of you here, she loved to write. For a decade, she wrote poems.
became the stage for what could only be described as an internal reckoning. Prince William, informed of every detail, from the shattered emerald in the Welsh gold ring to Camilla's cold declarations, assumed command. In the wood-paneled conference room, fortified against intrusion, he convened an urgent meeting of senior royals and Privy Council members. Evidence lay meticulously on the long oak table. Photographs, security reports, and transcripts of the mirror room confrontation. William's voice carried the weight of both familial duty and royal authority. The discussion was intense. Opinions divided. Some urged discretion, a private reprimand. But the prevailing sentiment, driven by William's resolve, favored a decisive public stance. The vote was cast. Camilla would lose the title of Queen Consort, stripped of constitutional authority and ceremonial prominence, becoming instead Princess Consort. She would issue a formal apology and bear the full cost of restoring the damaged ring, a symbolic and material restitution.
Welsh mounted pony. And I remember there was a very large horse show next door to us called Ditchling Horse Show.
That evening at Buckingham Palace, King Charles III faced the finality of the decision alone. The impaired Welsh gold ring lay before him as he signed the papers, his hand trembling, marking the end of a personal and public chapter. When Camilla entered, the assurance she once exuded had vanished, replaced by a quiet, brittle pride. "You have taken the ring, Camilla, and with it, my trust and the kingdom's confidence," Charles stated. The authority of the crown, unmistakable. She nodded once, pivoted, and left. Her decades-long pursuit of power and status abruptly curtailed. By morning, Camilla's pre-recorded statement on the BBC acknowledged her errors, expressing remorse, before she quietly exited the palace. Balmoral's gates reopened, but the castle and the fractured emerald would forever bear witness to the scandal that shook the House of Windsor. In the aftermath, the kingdom was starkly reminded. In the delicate world of crowns, ambition and love exist uneasily, and even the closest bonds are vulnerable to a single, decisive act. So what do you think triggered Queen Camilla's emotional reaction to the palace's shocking announcement about her title? And how will it change royal dynamics? We'd like to hear your thoughts in the comments section. Don't forget to share them below.